My name is Jason Aden. I work for Salesforce on a project called desk.com. Been having a lot of fun at the conference here. I've been doing Angular for about a little bit over a year and a half now. And one of the things that really impressed me was ngModelController and the ngModel directive and how you can use it to build nice custom components. So real quick, why ngModel? It's core to really good UI components. It's the thing responsible for two-way data binding in Angular. So when people ask you, what's the magic of Angular, and you show them the demo, and you have the input, you input the text, and it shows on screen immediately. That's ngModelController handling that. It's heavily utilized porting jQuery components. If you look at some of the packages in like Angular UI, and when you're porting components like the select2 component or date pickers, you have to wire it into the ngModelController. It also allows you to create nice declarative components. So the input directive in Angular has a couple of properties that you can apply to it: min length, max length, ng pattern. And when you write a piece of HTML like this, a designer can take a look at it, know what it is. Just about anybody could take a look at it and know what it's doing. And that's largely due to ngModelController and what it provides. So how do you access it? We may have covered this a little bit in some of the directive talks, but you apply it, you add ngModel to your directive, you're going to require it, and it'll come in the link function, as in this case the fourth argument, CTRL. You can also get access to it through element.data, the element data method, and hit $ngModelController. So what does it do? So when you're coming from the view and taking data from the view and putting it into the model, it's going to interact with ngForm. This is for things like dirty and pristine and valid, invalid. It's going to transform your input into the model representation. So real simple, like an input directive, you type in text, your model representation is text. With a directive like, say, a radio button or a date picker, your input might be something like a user click. So you need to translate that user click into something in the model. So ngModelController handles that. It also sends out alerts to listeners. ng-change would be an example. It will alert ng-change that your view value has changed. When going from the model to the view, it watches for changes in the model, and it transforms the model representation into a view representation. So in the case of, say, a date object in your model, you're going to want to format it properly for display. So ngModelController handles that. What doesn't it do? It doesn't by itself listen for user input. So when you're writing your directive, you need to listen for user input yourself. It doesn't update the view by itself. So that's also left to your own directive. And it doesn't interact with the DOM directly. All those would be left to the consumer of ngModel. I wanted to get into a little bit of code here. And essentially, I'm going to show two stub directives. One is the ngModel directive, and one is the Angular's input directive. And I'm just going to, as quickly as I can, sort of walk through the building of the ngModelController. There's sort of a number of pieces, and I've sort of found that this is one of the best ways to gain an understanding of how it works and how you might use it in your code. And what we're going to do first is build basic two-way binding. We do that through the setViewValue function and through a watch and the render method. Just one quick note, if you haven't, the parse service is used inside ngModelController, which essentially gives you access to a getter and a setter for your model value. So just for clarification. So if we take a look at, here is just a sample, two inputs. Both of them have ngModel on them, but ngModel right now is empty. So typing into these inputs doesn't actually do anything. And right here we have the ngModel directive, and it's just sort of a stubbed version. So the first key function in ngModel is setViewValue. Essentially, you pass it a value based on some interaction with the view, and it will go in and right here assign that value to your scope. You can't see it? Is that a little better? Okay, great. So that's setViewValue. Up here, we're inside the input directive. The Angular input directive actually doesn't modify a standard HTML input unless the ngModelController is accessible, which is this if statement here. And really all that we're going to do is listen for user input. After user input, we grab the value from the element and send it over to the ngModelController to apply it back down to the model. So these couple of lines should give us something that implements one-way data binding, and they do. So that's coming from the view into the model. But notice the second input doesn't update. That would be two-way data binding. So the two-way data binding is done through an interesting watch function. If you take a look at the documentation on scope watch, there's one line in there that says, it sort of talks about having a watch expression and no listener. And that's what this code does. So you have a watch expression. It runs on every digest cycle. So anything with ngModel attached, it will be checking your model for changes every digest cycle. If there is a change, it's going to run the render method. Now the render method by default is actually just a no-op function. It doesn't do anything. It is left to the consumer of ngModel to implement. So for an input, that's actually pretty simple. For an input, all that we need to do when we render is grab the value from ngModel of the view value and set it to element.val. So if this works, now when I refresh, we already had a model value there. So so the watch function runs and it executes the render method. It puts the data back into the input. And now two-way binding. So in those, it's about 40 lines of code in ngModel and about 12 to 15 lines of code in the input. That is the basics of Angular's two-way data binding system. So again, from the view to the model, we receive user input, pass it to setViewValue, and update the model. From the model back to the view, we watch for data changes and run the render method. Then there are these 5 properties on ngModel that you generally are going to want to get familiar with. Parsers, formatters, and view change listeners. All 3 of these are arrays. Parsers are functions that values get passed to when a value is sent to ngModel, and the return of the parser functions is what's applied to the model. Formatters is the reverse, so you take a value from the model and pass it back to the view and sort of maybe make adjustments to your data. View change listeners, NG-Change would be an example. It needs to be updated when the view gets changed, and dirty and pristine I think are pretty obvious. So I'm just going to replace some of this here with some defaults. And then inside setViewValue, again, all we're going to do is run through this list of parsers and pass the value in and take the return value and use that to update the model. I can get rid of this piece of code here. Inside of the input directive, what we might use that for would be something like the ng-min-length attribute. So we're just going to run it through basically a little validator and return an undefined value if the value is too short. So coming back over here to the HTML, the bottom input here has a min length of 5. So as you type, the value doesn't get applied, and once you hit the 5th character, it updates the model. Formatters are very similar. formatters are handled inside of the watch function. So the only real difference here, formatters receive the model value, and you just loop through them and update the value that you're going to apply to the view. The only difference is formatters go in reverse order. So then if we come back up here to the input directive, all that we need to do is apply formatters, push to the formatters array, and now the min-length validator will work going both ways. So the top input has no min-length, the bottom input does have a min-length, and won't be updated until we hit the 5th character. One of the other pieces that the ngModelController handles is dirty and pristine values. So when you make an update to the view value, when you run the setViewValue function, if that instance of the ngModelController is currently pristine, it will be marked as dirty, and you will get access to ngDirty classes. It previously would have been ngPristine. So in that case, when we make a modification, it's kind of hard to see here, but it changed from black to blue. Sort of the last thing that I wanted to show here as somewhat of an overview would be the setValidity function. So you use ngModelController for custom validators as well. So in the case of this directive, when min-length hasn't been reached, then we want to set validity. That's another method on the ngModelController. We want to set validity to false, and when the min-length has been reached, we want to set the validity to true. So this is what allows you to show, in this case, green inputs for valid, and when we go below the 5-character max or min-length, we show red. So ngModelController really is, it's what binds all this stuff together, and I figured I would try building a component. I called it Angular Spotlight. I ended up using ngModelController pretty heavily in a custom type ahead on a project, and a buddy of mine, Tony M, is pretty good with CSS, so he figured we would take a crack at building something that sort of replicates Apple's Spotlight control and wire in ngModelController. So you know, here we see some parsers. We're using a setViewValue function, etc. But to me, the kind of cool thing about a control like this really is if you use ngModelController correctly, you can really limit the amount of code that you have to write in order to build something that's nice, simple, declarative. So here we have the directive Angular Spotlight. We wire in ngModel, and we pass it a fetch function. That's really it. So we go over here. I'm going to hope this works. So you're all familiar. This one is Apple's Spotlight, and you know, search for things and find them. This one is Angular Spotlight, and let's see. So we have a folder images. We get a little representation of that. If we wanted to search for our conference, here's a website, Angular JS Awesomeness. You know, can go ahead and take a look. I tried mirroring myself here, but that didn't actually work when I clicked here. And let's see, what else do we have in here? Yeoman. I have 3 kids who I think are watching right now. The baby, Ashley, the middle one, Brianna, and the big one, Chloe. But one of the cool things when you use ngModelController, let's say I were to select this value. So we see here, this is the model representation of that Chloe value. It is an object, but when we look in the input here, we see the word Chloe. We don't see some bracket, object bracket, and we can update what's in the input without changing the model. And that is because of ngModelController. So then when we want to make a change, we go ahead and click here. It will update what's in the input. It will update what's back here. And if we escape out of the input and clear it, we're still not touching the model. We're not touching the model until it passes, say, the formatters and the parsers. Actually, the parsers. So sort of that interplay, I thought, was one of the coolest things about the ngModelController. Just you have a pretty small amount of code to build something that I think would be pretty difficult to build, managing the difference between the representation in your model and the representation in your view without something like ngModelController. So that's actually about all that I had to go over. And sort of the last thing was what really got me into looking into this stuff and researching sort of the lower levels of Angular was going through some of the Angular UI source code. I kind of like reading source code and really decomposing it. I feel like it gives you a really good understanding of sort of the inner workings of things. So I just wanted to mention Dean Sofer has a little talk that he's going to do later. He's the curator of the Angular UI project. And just since that was a little bit of an inspiration for me getting into some of the bowels of Angular, I figured I'd mention, I think he's going to be talking after all the seminars tonight. So that's it. Thank you.